In the novel Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, the main character, Victor Frankenstein, has a grand epiphany after working on a project for 2 long, arduous years. This epiphany occurs as Victor realizes he has discovered the secret of what creates life. Growing up in Geneva, Switzerland, Victor spent his childhood reading the works of outdated and ancient alchemists. All of his childhood learning does not help him when he attends the University of Ingolstadt and must learn about modern science. However, with a voracious appetite for learning, he quickly masters all that his professors have to teach him. His obsession with learning and fascination with the secret of life leads him to experiment. Thus, he discovers the secret of life by combining both old and new science. His creation is an intelligent but grotesque monster.
At this time, Victor is young and naive, perhaps in his early 20s. He becomes consumed by his studies and his pursuit of knowledge. His professors and his parents urged him to stop his project, but his obsession will not allow him to stop. Victor abandons almost all of his normal activities, including schoolwork, and works solely on his project. His friends live many miles away from him, and he does not visit them. His father writes him and wishes he would respond in order to know that Victor is doing well. Despite their worries, Victor keeps on working in a feverish state, finding the time researching to one of the most beautiful seasons. In Chapter 4, Victor's emotions are focused on his work. He is astonished and surprised when he finally discovered the secret. He says, quote, "I was surprised that among so many men of genius who had directed their inquiries towards the same science, that I alone should be reserved to discover so astonishing a secret." End quote. He may have also felt anticipation, as he will soon find out what this secret will do for him.
In Chapter 5, where we focus our analysis and his psyche develops, Victor completes his work with, quote, "an anxiety that almost amounted to agony," end quote, and infuses his creation with the spark of life. Then, the eye of the monster opens and Victor tells us, quote, "How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch with whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form," end quote. He does not, at first, know what to feel. As he takes in the fruits of his labors, the grotesque body, the yellow skin, and lustrous black hair, his feelings quickly turn into, quote, "breathless horror and disgust," end quote. He is afraid and flees from the monster. Victor also feels disappointment as his feelings, quote, "mingled with his horror, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest for so long a space were now become a hell to me," end quote. In this passage, Victor awakens at the same time the creature does. He is awakened to the horrors of his project. Victor's epiphany is, in his obsessive pursuit, he played God and created a monstrous creature.
It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishments of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch whom with such infinite pains and care I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion, and straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation, but now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room, continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length, lassitude succeeded to the tumult I had endured, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams.
I thought I saw Elizabeth, in the boom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her. But as I imprinted the first kiss on the lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the gray worms crawling in the folds of her flannel.
I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead. My teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed, when, by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch. The miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaws opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped and rushed downstairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound, as it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. Oh, no mortal could support the horror of that countenance. A mummy again, endued with animation, could not be so hideous as that wretch. I had gazed on him while unfinished, he was ugly then. But when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such as even Dante could not have conceived. I passed the night wretchedly. Sometimes my pulse beat so quickly and hardly that I felt the palpitation of every artery. At others, I nearly sank to the ground through languor and extreme weakness. Mingled with this horror, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest for so long a space were now become a hell to me, and the change was so rapid, the overthrow so complete.
In the novel, Mary Shelley utilizes many complex sentences to describe and explain Victor Frankenstein and other characters. This passage is not much different. Even when describing Victor Frankenstein's horror, complex sentences are used. An example of one of the many sentences that follow this format is, quote, "It was already 1 a.m. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion against its limbs." Quote, page 31. This is found at the beginning of chapter 5. There are several other long, complex sentences that can be found in the passage that will be acted out. The sentences are also mainly balanced sentences, where every clause is equally important and equal in length. There is also parallelism in this passage. Quote, "His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black, and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast when his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same color as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips." End quote, page 32. The beginning words of the clauses are what makes it parallel. His yellow skin, his hair, his teeth, and his shriveled complexion. There are no examples of chasmasis in the passage. The majority of the sentences are long because the scene takes place in the mind of Victor Frankenstein, therefore replicating how the brain thinks. In the passage, there is rarely a simple sentence. Quote, "Great God," quote, page 31, is one of the few. The sentence, quote, "How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch with whom, with such infinite pains and care, I have endeavored to form," quote, page 31, sets the mood for the whole scene, with Victor Frankenstein going on to talk about the monster he created, all in a very negative light. The reader also views the monster in a negative light because of the horrible descriptions of the
In the passage, the reader sees the motif of what does it mean to be human in God versus science. The monster is created, yet Frankenstein looks at him and thinks about how he created him to be beautiful and look like a human, but he is a monster. Quote, his limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes. Throughout the book, we see a couple of different motifs, one being, what does it mean to be human? The monster in Frankenstein looks like a human, speaks fluently like a human, and is emotional like a human, yet is referred to as a monster and not a human. Throughout the whole book, he goes between having human characteristics and an emotional side to killing his creator's family. Though the monster tells the readers that it was all out of vengeance for what his creator had done to him, creating for an interesting read for the reader who is trying to decide if the monster is human or not. The reader
Alliteration, consonants, and assonants were not very prominent in the passage chosen. However, there are 3 examples of alliteration. Quote, with an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, quote, page 31, quote, at length lassitude, quote, page 31, and, quote, the miserable monster, quote, page 31. Since there are not many examples of these 3 sound devices in the chosen text, there is no effect on the tempo, tone, or mood. Shelley uses different sound devices and word choices to create a darker tone. A professional actor or reader.
The passage was chosen from the beginning of chapter 5. It displays Victor's moment of epiphany in which he realizes he has created a monster. Lesson is, kids, don't play God.